Who let this street kid into my advanced seminar? Professor Sterling's voice didn't just echo in the lecture hall. It cut through the silence like a knife. It was 2 p.m. on a gloomy Wednesday in November, only 2 days before the campus would empty out for Thanksgiving break. Outside, the wind whipped the last of the autumn leaves against the frosted windows of Lecture Hall 304, but inside, the air was stagnant, smelling of wet wool, old chalk dust, and anxiety. Marcus Thorne sat in the very last row, tucked away in the shadows of the corner. He pulled the sleeves of his faded, oversized gray hoodie down over his hands, keeping his eyes fixed on the scarred wooden desk in front of him. He wasn't looking at the professor, but he could feel the man's gaze burning into him, heavy with disdain. Professor Arthur Sterling, a man who wore his tweed suit like armor and wielded his tenure like a weapon, paced the front of the room. He was handing back the midterm papers, tossing them onto students' desks with a sneer. But when he reached the back row, he didn't toss the paper. He held it up, dangling it between two fingers as if it were contaminated trash. "Mr. Thorne," Sterling said, his voice dripping with a mock politeness that was far worse than shouting. "I assume the admissions office has a diversity quota to fill, but I do wish they wouldn't send their charity cases to my department to lower the curve." A ripple of nervous, uncomfortable laughter ran through the room. Marcus didn't flinch. He just tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack, where a tattered, yellowing notebook lay hidden like a lifeline. "Keep your head up, son," Mrs. Rose had told him earlier that morning at the campus diner, slipping him a free coffee and a warm bagel when his card was declined. "Don't let them steal your joy." He held on to that memory now, letting Sterling's words slide off him like rain on glass. He wasn't here for Sterling's approval. He was here for something else. "Silence," Sterling snapped, turning his back to the class to face the massive slate blackboard. "Since most of you seem content with mediocrity, I have decided to offer a little holiday surprise." He picked up a fresh piece of chalk and began to write. The sound was harsh, a screeching scratch against the slate that made students wince. Sterling wrote with aggressive strokes, covering the center of the board with a tangle of Greek letters, variables, and complex functions. It looked less like mathematics and more like a chaotic, alien language. When he stepped back, dusting his hands, a collective gasp filled the room. "This," Sterling announced, puffing out his chest, "is the Sterling conjecture. I have been refining it for 25 years. It is unsolvable to the common mind. But, in the spirit of the season, I am offering an automatic A to anyone who can solve it." He paused, his eyes finding Marcus again, narrowing with malice. "Though I imagine some of us wouldn't even know which end of the chalk to hold." The class was silent. The air grew heavy, suffocating. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Sterling smiled, a cruel, thin expression that didn't reach his eyes. He pointed a manicured finger directly at the back corner. "You, Mr. Thorne. Come up here. Let's show the class exactly why standards exist." The room blurred. Marcus stood up slowly. His legs felt heavy, but his mind was strangely clear. He walked down the long aisle, the sound of his worn sneakers squeaking faintly against the linoleum. He could feel the eyes of 30 privileged students on his back judging, pitying, waiting for the crash. He reached the front. Sterling shoved the chalk into his hand. His skin was cold, clammy, and repulsed. Marcus turned to the board. Up close, the equation looked different. It wasn't just symbols. It was a language he knew. It was a song he had heard before. Marcus stands before the massive blackboard, the complex equation looming over him. Sterling whispers, "You have 5 minutes to pack your bags." The chalk felt heavy in Marcus's hand, cold and dusty. But as he looked at the board, the fear vanished. To the 30 other students in the room, the sprawling white symbols on the slate were a fortress, an impenetrable wall of logic designed to keep people like Marcus out. They saw Greek letters and impossible variables. But Marcus didn't see a wall. He saw a window. He saw a Sunday afternoon from 12 years ago, the smell of rain hitting a tin roof, and his father's calloused hands sketching these exact curves into a notebook that cost 99 cents. The Sunday puzzle, his father had called it. A game to pass the time when they couldn't afford cable TV. Sterling called it the Sterling conjecture, claiming it as his life's work, but the shapes didn't lie. This wasn't a challenge. It was a memory. Tick-tock, Mr. Thorne. Sterling sneered from the side of the room, making a show of checking his gold Rolex. He leaned back against his desk, arms crossed, already composing the expulsion paperwork in his head. Don't strain yourself. If you simply walk out now, we can all pretend this embarrassing display never happened. A few students snickered, the sound sharp and cruel in the quiet room. Marcus closed his eyes for a heartbeat. The classroom faded. The expensive sweaters, the judgmental stares, the cold November wind rattling the windows, it all dissolved. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he heard a voice, deep and gravelly, warm like a blanket. Numbers don't lie, son. People do. Focus on the truth, and the noise will disappear. Marcus opened his eyes. He didn't look at Sterling. He didn't look at the class. He looked only at the first variable. He began to write. It wasn't a tentative scratch. It was a slash of certainty. The chalk hit the board with a rhythmic tat-tat-tat that echoed like gunfire in the silent hall. He didn't start with the standard derivation found in the textbooks, the long, tedious method that Sterling taught. That would have taken 20 minutes. Instead, Marcus used Method C. It was a shorthand technique his father had invented to save paper, a way of collapsing complex polynomials into elegant, simple bridges. It was unconventional. It was aggressive. It was beautiful. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light as Marcus moved across the board. He wasn't solving a problem. He was composing a symphony. His hand flew, the white lines connecting, transforming, simplifying. He was rewriting the narrative that had been forced upon him, turning the impossible into the inevitable. Behind him, the atmosphere in the room shifted tectonically. The snickers died in throats. The shuffling of feet stopped. A girl in the front row, the class valedictorian who had spent the last hour terrified of the problem, leaned forward, her mouth falling slightly open. She wasn't watching a failure. She was watching a master at work. Sterling's smirk faltered. He uncrossed his arms. He took a step forward, his polished shoes clicking nervously on the linoleum. He squinted at the board, trying to find the mistake, the gibberish he expected. But there was no gibberish. The logic was sound. It was too sound. And then, a different kind of realization hit him, a cold, physical blow to the gut. It wasn't just that the boy was solving it. It was how he was solving it. The handwriting. The specific, jagged loop of the integral symbol. The way the X was crossed with a sharp, upward flick. Sterling knew that script. He had seen it 25 years ago, on pages he had stolen from a graduate student's desk, a student he had crushed to build his own empire. The blood drained from Sterling's face, leaving him as pale as the chalk in Marcus's hand. He wasn't looking at a student anymore. He was looking at a ghost. Marcus didn't see the professor's panic. He was in the zone, the final sequence locking into place. The chaos on the board had resolved itself into a single, elegant identity. The math was perfect. The truth was laid bare. He drew the final double line under the solution, a sharp, decisive underscore. The chalk snapped in his hand, a small piece falling to the floor with a soft click. Marcus set the remaining stub on the tray. He dusted his hands on his jeans, took a deep breath, and turned around. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy enough to crush a man, but Marcus stood taller than he ever had in his life. "It's solved," Marcus said softly. The class remained frozen, eyes wide, oscillating between the board and the boy in the gray hoodie. Sterling looked down at the stopwatch in his trembling hand. The second hand had barely swept past the half-minute mark for the second time. 94 seconds. Instead of praise, Sterling's face turns purple with rage. He slams his hand on the desk. "You cheater. Who gave you the answers?" Rumors spread faster than the November wind. By dinner time, the whole campus knew. The quiet kid from the back row, the one nobody ever spoke to, the one who worked the night shift at the bakery, had humiliated the department chair in less than 2 minutes. Students who had never glanced at Marcus before were now whispering as he walked past, their eyes wide with a mixture of suspicion and awe. But Marcus didn't hear applause. He heard the ominous silence of a storm gathering. He didn't go to the dining hall. He went straight to his tiny dorm room, locking the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew this wasn't over. Men like Sterling didn't just accept defeat. They declared war. The summons arrived the next morning, slipped under his door in a crisp, cream-colored envelope embossed with the university seal. Office of the Chair. Immediate attendance required. Professor Sterling's office was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous room on the top floor of the administration building, smelling of expensive leather, mahogany polish, and old money. The walls were lined not with books, but with framed awards, plaques, and newspaper clippings celebrating the Sterling conjecture. It was a shrine to a stolen ego. Sterling sat behind a desk the size of a small car, the morning light reflecting off his gold-rimmed glasses, turning his eyes into unreadable mirrors. He didn't offer Marcus a seat. "Let me be direct, Mr. Thorne," Sterling said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. He placed a single sheet of paper on the desk, smoothing it out with his palm. "I've seen this before. A student from a disadvantaged background, desperate for validation, finds a leaked solution online, perhaps an obscure journal from the 90s, or a forum on the dark web. You memorize the symbols, you wait for your moment, and you perform a parlor trick to embarrass your superior." Marcus felt the heat rising in his neck. "I didn't memorize anything. I solved it. Don't lie to me." Sterling slammed his hand on the desk, the veneer of calmness cracking. "No undergraduate solves that equation. Certainly not one who is here on a diversity waiver. I know your type. You think the world owes you a seat at the table just because you exist." Sterling's words carried a venom that felt personal, ancient. It wasn't just racism. It was recognition. He was looking at Marcus, but seeing someone else, a ghost from 25 years ago who had threatened his throne. He slid the paper across the desk. It was an expulsion notice, already drafted, needing only a signature. "This is a formal charge of academic dishonesty. Plagiarism. Fraud. It will follow you forever. No other university will touch you. Your scholarship will be revoked. You'll be back sweeping floors by Christmas." Sterling leaned back, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Unless what?" Marcus whispered, his throat dry. "Unless you withdraw from the university voluntarily. Today. Cite family reasons. Disappear, Mr. Thorne. Go back to where you came from, and I will let you leave with your record clean." Marcus walked out of the building into the biting cold, the ultimatum ringing in his ears. Disappear or be destroyed. He felt small, powerless against the crushing weight of the institution. He took the long bus ride home to the south side of town, to the small, drafty apartment he shared with his mother. The smell of frying onions and paprika hit him as he opened the door, a smell that usually meant safety, but tonight, it felt like a goodbye. Linda Thorne was a woman made of iron and grace, her hands rough from years of cleaning other people's houses so Marcus could hold a pencil. She saw the look on his face immediately. She turned off the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. "Marcus? What happened? Is it school?" Marcus slumped onto the worn sofa, the fight draining out of him. "I messed up, Mom. I solved a problem I wasn't supposed to. The professor, he says I cheated. He's going to expel me unless I quit." "Who says this?" Linda's voice hardened. "What is his name?" "Sterling. Professor Arthur Sterling." The color drained from Linda's face so fast it was frightening. She grabbed the edge of the kitchen table to steady herself. The silence that stretched between them was heavy, filled with 20 years of secrets. "Sterling," she whispered, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "He is still there? He is still hurting people. You know him?" Linda didn't answer. She walked past him, straight to the hallway closet, reaching up to the highest shelf to pull down a battered cardboard box taped shut with layers of old masking tape. She set it on the coffee table with a heavy thud. Dust motes danced in the dim light of the living room. "I never wanted you to see this," she said, her hands trembling as she peeled back the tape. "I thought if I kept it hidden, the past couldn't hurt you. But I was wrong." She opened the box. Inside were stacks of yellowing composition notebooks, the cheap kind you buy at the dollar store. But these were filled not with schoolwork, but with dense, beautiful mathematics. The same method C, the same jagged integrals, the same genius. "These belong to your father," Linda said, tears welling in her eyes. "Elias Thorne." He wasn't just a maintenance man, Marcus. In 1999, he was a doctoral student at Oakbridge, the brightest they had ever seen. She pulled out a specific notebook, opening it to a page dated October 14th, 1999. Sterling was his advisor, she continued, her voice breaking with a decades-old rage. Your father solved that equation. He showed it to Sterling, trusting him. 2 weeks later, Sterling published it under his own name. He told the board that Elias had stolen the work from him. Because Elias was a black man from the projects and Sterling was a legacy hire, they believed the lie. They expelled your father. They destroyed his reputation. He never recovered. Marcus stared at the notebook. There it was. The Sterling conjecture, written in his father's hurried, excited hand, months before Sterling claimed to have discovered it. The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sterling hadn't just challenged him. He had baited him with his own father's stolen legacy. Marcus holds his father's original notebook. He killed my father's dreams, Marcus whispers, clutching the proof. I'm not letting him kill mine. You want me to believe that the department chair built his entire career on a lie? Dr. Sarah Jenkins didn't look up from her grading, her voice skeptical but curious. It was Thanksgiving morning. The university campus was a ghost town, the usual hustle of students replaced by the eerie silence of empty corridors and locked doors. The heating system in the mathematics building rattled and hummed, fighting against the gray chill outside. Dr. Jenkins was the only faculty member present, a woman known for her peppermint tea, her terrifying calculus exams, and her absolute refusal to play departmental politics. Marcus stood in the doorway of her cramped, book-lined office, clutching the cardboard box against his chest as if it contained a bomb. I don't just want you to believe it, Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly but his eyes steady. I can prove it. But I need you to look. Please. Just 10 minutes. Dr. Jenkins finally looked up. She adjusted her glasses, peering at the young man in the faded hoodie standing amidst her towers of textbooks. She saw the desperation in his stance, but also a strange, quiet dignity that felt familiar. She sighed, capping her red pen. It's a holiday, Mr. Thorne. I should be at home basting a turkey. But Arthur Sterling has been strutting around like a peacock since Tuesday. If you have something that explains why, I'll give you 5 minutes. Marcus stepped inside and placed the box on her cluttered desk. He didn't start with an explanation. He didn't start with the solution to the Sterling conjecture. Instead, he pulled out the oldest notebook, the one with the spine taped together with silver duct tape. He opened it to a page covered in dense, frantic scribbles and pushed it toward her. Do you recognize this handwriting? Jenkins frowned, leaning forward. Why would I? Her voice trailed off. Her eyes scanned the page, not the numbers, but the shape of the letters. The way the G looped specifically to the left. The sharp, aggressive slant of the notes in the margins. Her breath hitched. She reached out, tracing the ink with a trembling finger. This looks like... She looked up at Marcus, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock. This looks like Elias Thorne's writing. We were doctoral candidates together. Class of '99. He was my father, Marcus said softly. The silence that filled the small office was thick with ghosts. Jenkins took off her glasses, her eyes suddenly wet. Elias. The most brilliant mind I ever met. He'd disappeared. After the plagiarism scandal with Sterling, he just vanished. I tried to find him, but he died when I was 6. Marcus cut in, the pain fresh. But he left me this. He taught me. Jenkins looked at the boy, really looked at him, and saw the resemblance she had missed before. The same intensity. The same jawline. If you are his son, she said, her voice hardening with professional rigor, then you know that sentimentality isn't proof. Sterling says you cheated. He says you memorized a solution. Can you prove you didn't? Test me. Jenkins didn't hesitate. She grabbed a blank sheet of paper and a thick marker. She wrote down a complex theorem, a nonlinear partial differential equation that she used to weed out grad students. Solve this. Use the standard Fourier transform. Marcus looked at the paper. He picked up the pen. I don't use Fourier. It takes too long. He started to write. He used his father's method, see the shorthand, the visual jumps, the collapsing of variables that looked chaotic to an outsider but flowed like music to a master. He moved with the same terrifying speed he had shown in the lecture hall. Jenkins watched him, her mouth tightening. She wasn't watching a cheater. She was watching a technique she hadn't seen in 25 years. It was the mathematical fingerprint of Elias Thorne. Marcus finished in under 3 minutes. He spun the paper around. Jenkins stared at it. The logic was flawless. Unique. Undeniable. "My God," she whispered. "He really taught you everything." "Look at the dates, Dr. Jenkins," Marcus urged, opening the notebook to the page with this sterling conjecture. "Look at the date in the corner." Jenkins leaned in. October 14th, 1999. She stood up, walked to her bookshelf, and pulled down a leather-bound volume, the Journal of Advanced Mathematics, Volume 42. She flipped to the index, found Sterling's seminal paper, and opened it. Published, January 2000. Submission received, November 1999. The timeline was irrefutable. Elias had solved it a month before Sterling even submitted the paper. Sterling hadn't just discovered it, he had stolen it from a student he was supposed to be mentoring. "He stole it," Jenkins said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "He stole his life's work, ruined his reputation to cover it up, and built a tenure on a lie." She looked at Marcus, and for the first time, she smiled a fierce, dangerous smile. "And now he's trying to do it to you." She slammed the notebook shut, grabbing her coat and phone. "The hearing is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Put on your best suit, Marcus. We're going to war." The dean's conference room was cold, sterile, and silent except for the rhythmic, arrogant tapping of Professor Sterling's pen against the mahogany table. It was 9 a.m. on the Friday after Thanksgiving. Outside, the campus remained quiet, but inside this soundproof chamber, the air was thick with tension. The room was dominated by a long, polished table that separated the powerful from the powerless. On one side sat Dean Miller and 2 other senior administrators, their faces impassive. On the other side sat Marcus, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit he had bought from a thrift store, and Dr. Sarah Jenkins, whose jaw was set like granite. Across from them, alone and looking utterly relaxed, was Professor Arthur Sterling. He didn't look like a man accused of anything. He looked like a king holding court. "This is a waste of the committee's time," Sterling sighed, finally stopping the tapping. He didn't even look at Marcus. "The facts are simple. Mr. Thorne, a student with a, let's say, limited academic history, produced a solution to a problem that has baffled field medalists for 2 decades. He offers no derivation, no notes, no proof of work. He simply memorized a sequence of symbols he found on some obscure internet forum. It is a classic case of fraud born of desperation." Sterling turned to the dean, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I take no pleasure in this, Dean Miller. But Oakbridge is a fortress of integrity. If we allow street charlatans to mock our standards, what do we have left?" Dean Miller adjusted his glasses, turning to Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, you are facing immediate expulsion. Do you have anything to say?" Marcus stood up. His hands were trembling slightly, but he placed them flat on the table to steady them. "I didn't cheat," he said, his voice quiet but filling the room. "And Professor Sterling knows it. Because he didn't test my math. He tested my memory. He assumed I couldn't understand the language of that equation. But I grew up speaking it." He looked directly at Sterling. "You didn't just fail me, Professor. You failed him." Sterling scoffed. "Him? Who are we talking about now?" "God." "No," Dr. Jenkins cut in, her voice sharp as a whip. She stood up, opening the battered cardboard box she had brought with her. "We are talking about Elias Thorne." The name hit Sterling like a physical slap. His smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. "Elias Thorne," Jenkins continued, pulling out the duct-taped notebook and a copy of Sterling's famous published paper. She slid them down the long table toward the dean. "In 1999, Elias was a doctoral candidate under Professor Sterling. He was brilliant. And he was erased." She pointed to the documents. "Dean Miller, look at the dates. The document on the left is Sterling's publication of the Sterling conjecture, dated January 2000. The document on the right is Elias Thorne's personal research journal. The entry containing the full, correct solution using a unique shorthand notation is dated October 14th, 1999. The dean picked up the notebook, his brows furrowing. The room was deathly silent. Sterling stood up, his face flushing red. This is preposterous. That notebook is a forgery. A fabrication created by a desperate mother and a lying son. You cannot prove authenticity based on scribbles in a dollar store diary. We expected you to say that, Marcus said. He walked over to the whiteboard at the end of the room. He picked up a marker and drew a line down the middle. You say it's your work, Professor? You say you spent 25 years refining it. I am the department chair. Sterling sputtered. I do not answer to you. Then answer to the math, Marcus challenged. If you wrote it, you can solve it. Right now. But here is the catch. Solve it using the method in your published paper. And I will solve it using the method in the notebook. Let's see which one is real. Sterling froze. The trap had snapped shut. Do it, Arthur, Dean Miller said, his voice cold. If it is your work, this should be effortless. Sterling walked to the board. He picked up the marker. He looked at the equation he had built his fame on. He knew the answer, of course. He had memorized the final result. But he had never understood the bridge. He had stolen the destination without knowing the path. He stared at the white surface, sweat beading on his forehead. The marker hovered, trembling. On the other side of the line, Marcus began to write. Swish, swish, tap. The method C flowed out of him, simple, elegant, undeniable. Sterling stood paralyzed. He wrote a standard integral, then erased it. He wrote a derivative, then stopped. His mind was blank. The genius of the Sterling conjecture evaporated under the harsh fluorescent lights, leaving only a scared, fraudulent old man. After 2 minutes, Marcus capped his marker. His side of the board was a masterpiece of logic. Sterling's side was empty. The silence was no longer heavy. It was absolute. Sterling dropped his marker. It clattered to the floor, echoing like a gunshot. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. Dean Miller looked at the blank board, then at the notebook, and finally at the sweating back of the department chair. He closed the file in front of him with a decisive thud. It seems, Professor, the dean said, his voice devoid of any respect, that you are the one who needs to pack your bags. Snow began to fall on the Oakbridge campus, covering the old brick paths in a blanket of clean, fresh white, washing away the stains of the past. It was exactly 1 year later, and the biting wind that used to howl through the quad seemed to have lost its teeth. The atmosphere at the university had shifted, lighter and easier to breathe. The oppressive fog that Professor Sterling had maintained for 2 decades had lifted, replaced by clarity that felt like spring despite the December chill. Professor Arthur Sterling didn't just lose his job, he lost his history. The investigation that followed the hearing was swift and brutal. It wasn't just the Thorne case. Once the dam broke, the floodwaters revealed a career built on intimidation and theft. His tenure was revoked, a historic first for Oakbridge. His name was chiseled off the donor wall in the library. His articles were retracted from the journals, leaving blank spaces where his arrogance used to be. The last anyone heard, he was teaching remedial algebra at a community college 3 states away, a ghost in his own life. But while one name was erased, another was carved in stone. In the lobby of the mathematics department, a new portrait now hung in the place of honor. It showed a young, smiling black man with bright eyes and a notebook in his hand. The brass plaque underneath read, Elias Thorne, the architect of the Thorne conjecture. Truth is the only variable that matters. Marcus stood in front of that portrait for a long moment, adjusting his tie. He wasn't the invisible boy in the hoodie anymore. He was a teaching assistant, currently finishing his own accelerated degree, with a full scholarship provided by the university as an apology. He turned away from the portrait and walked out into the snow, heading toward the edge of campus. He pushed open the door to Rose's diner, the bell jingling cheerfully. The smell of frying bacon and old coffee hit him, the smell of home. Mrs. Rose was behind the counter, looking tired but smiling as she wiped down a table. Marcus, baby, she called out, beaming. I saw your picture in the paper again. They say you're going to be the youngest professor the school ever had. Just a TA for now, Rose. Marcus smiled, sliding onto a stool. He didn't order the cheapest thing on the menu today. He ordered the special, and he ordered one for her, too. When the bill came, he put down his card, a new one, that didn't get declined. He tipped her $100. Marcus, no, she protested, her eyes widening. That's too much. It's interest, he said softly, covering her hand with his. For the bagel you gave me last year when I wanted to quit. You fed me when I was hungry, Rose. I'm just balancing the equation. He left the diner with her protests fading into happy tears behind him and headed for Lecture Hall 304. The room was different now. The gloom was gone, replaced by warm lighting and the hum of chatter. Students were filing in for the introductory seminar, Marcus's seminar. He walked to the front, placing his notes on the desk where Sterling used to terrorize them. He looked up at the rows of faces. They looked eager, scared, hopeful. And then he saw him. In the very back row, tucked into the darkest corner, sat a boy who looked like he was trying to disappear. He was wearing a coat that was too thin for the weather, his arms crossed defensively, his eyes fixed on the desk. He looked terrified. He looked alone. He looked exactly like Marcus had looked 365 days ago. Marcus stopped organizing his papers. He picked up a brand new, high-quality composition notebook and a set of good pens. He walked up the aisle, the room falling silent, but this silence wasn't heavy. It was curious. He reached the back row. The boy flinched as Marcus approached, expecting a reprimand, expecting to be told he didn't belong. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, his voice low and kind. "Leo," the boy whispered, not making eye contact. I'm just auditing. I can leave." "Don't you dare," Marcus said. He placed the notebook and pens on the desk in front of Leo. "You have a look in your eye, Leo. The look of someone who sees patterns where other people see chaos." Leo looked up, stunned. "My father taught me that talent hides in the quietest places," Marcus continued, smiling a genuine, brotherly smile. "This class is hard. People will tell you that you can't do it. But you're going to prove them wrong. And I'm going to help you." He patted the boy on the shoulder, a touch of solidarity that bridged the gap between their generations. "Welcome to number theory, Leo. You belong here." Marcus walked back to the front of the room. He picked up the chalk, no longer a cold weapon, but a tool of creation. He turned to the board, where the complex, beautiful loops of the Thorne conjecture were already written as an example of elegance. He looked at the class, took a deep breath, and began to teach. The student smiles back, hope returning to his eyes. The camera pans to the blackboard where the Thorne equation is proudly written. Fade to black. In a world often quick to judge by appearances, Marcus Thorne reminds us that true brilliance and true character cannot be hidden by a faded hoodie or a quiet demeanor. Just like a single candle can light a dark room, one act of belief, whether from a mother's love or a stranger's kindness, has the power to rewrite a destiny and correct the mistakes of the past. So, the next time you see someone standing in the shadows, remember that they might just be holding the light that changes everything, if only we are brave enough to welcome them in.